Hello, it's Wednesday, and it is what is this? Thanksgiving Eve. Yeah, okay. So it's pre-Thanksgiving, Thanksgiving Eve, and I'm here. I did my yesterday, y'all, so I could make sure to be here with you guys today. So thank you to everyone who is here with me, who put down the utensils for a couple of minutes to come live with me and hear a little bit about what I have to say today. I'm going to be doing my preliminary, posting and sharing and trying to bring everybody on board. So give me just a moment as I do those things. And while you settle in, would you please be so kind as to share this on your Facebook timeline so that others can see what we're talking about today? One of the things that I'm going to be talking about, and I want to thank those of you who have been sending requests, if you will, commenting on things that I've talked about in previous podcasts, as well as previous Facebook Live shows. And I had a couple of people ask me with regards to some issues that were concerning and they wanted some clarification on. So I'm going to address a couple of things. I'm going to talk a little bit about the FOP. Someone from my YouTube family wanted some clarification, if you will, with regards to FOP, Fraternal Order of Police Officers. They described it as a secret society. It's not really that, sir. But I'm going to talk a little bit about FOP versus Black police officer associations, because you understand that most police departments, not all, if we aren't on the police department, then obviously there's no reason for them to create a Black Police Officers Association. But for those departments that do have Black police officer associations, I'm just going to tell you why I think they act or don't act the way that they do, as well as the National Black Police Officers Association, which is the National Black Police Officers Association is just what it says, a national organization of all these little police departments around the nation who come together on a national level. And while there are police departments like LAPD that has a Black Police Officers Association, ours is called Oscar Joe Bryant. They may or may not participate on a national level, may or may not participate with the National Black Police Officers Association. And, I have an idea about why that happens or doesn't happen as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those two things because you guys asked, and I'm going to give the people what they asked, right? So as you come on, again, share this with your Facebook timeline and ask others to do the same. One of the things that I wanted to start off talking about today was the incident that has been going viral on social media with regards to this young man who's a former Washington State University football player. His name is Treshawn Broughton. And this was a young man who evidently went into a convenience store on campus or near the campus, near Washington State University, and was accused of presenting a counterfeit $20 bill. And the store clerk called the police on this young man. And for those of you who haven't seen it, we'll be sharing, myself and Charles, who's here with me today. He won't be coming on, you won't see him, but he's here in the background working feverishly with me. So hey, Charles, thank you for helping me get these links up. But anyway, so this young man, Treshawn Broughton, was in a convenience store, and the clerk falsely called the police and said that he was trying to pass a counterfeit 20, and the officers arrived, and of course things went south fairly quickly, which brings me to comply and complain, right? My speaking tour that you hear me reference often, because thankfully this young man was only inconvenienced in that he was arrested, he was charged. Of course, the charges were later dropped, and that's what always happens when you're falsely arrested for something that you did not do, right? But you have to suffer the inconvenience of being humiliated in public, taken to a police facility, maybe have your car towed if you had a vehicle there that they don't want to leave behind. The inconvenience and the expense of whatever happens as a result of your being taken into custody, whether you're released right away, whether or not you have to put up bail and then the charges are dropped sometime later. I don't really know the sequence of events with this young man, but what I do know based on reports is that charges were eventually dropped, because guess what? The store clerk couldn't find that counterfeit $20 bill that they accused Treshawn of having. And so the problem is that Treshawn had been drinking. He was a little drunk, according to reports, allegedly, and he was most uncooperative when the officers approached him and they first asked him for his ID, and he started asking, you know, some questions, and then he says, okay, here's my ID, I'm trying to give it to you. And at that point, the officers had already changed channels. They switched gears and they weren't really interested in his ID. Maybe they weren't interested in him presenting his ID from the get-go. Maybe that was just, they were hoping and praying to the non-compliance gods, if you will, that he would do just what he did so that they could do just what they did. Now, we don't know what's going to happen ultimately with these officers, if they're going to be disciplined, because thankfully there was no loss of life. So they may or may not receive some kind of an administrative penalty. They may live to offend again, and they may have to take a life before that police department decides to do something about these two officers who were very aggressive with this young man, and who, by the way, intentionally, and I'm going to say air quotes, misrepresented the facts surrounding this case. And that's what's alleged in a lawsuit that Treshawn has filed just a few weeks ago. He filed a lawsuit, and the officers intentionally misrepresented the events according to the lawsuit. In other words, they lied. They lied about him being aggressive. They lied about him charging or acting in a manner that would have justified that excessive use of force. And so all of this stuff will be adjudicated at some point in time in the future, whether or not it goes to trial or whether or not it's settled out of court. But again, all of this could have been, well, maybe not all of it could have been avoided, but I think some of it could have been avoided if the young man had just let them do what it is that they're going to do. Because once again, once police officers decide that you're going to leave a place, you're going to show your ID, you're going to, whatever it is they're asking you to do, that you're not doing it, once they decide that that's what they want you to do, they will compel you, they will force you to do it. And sometimes in the forcing of that, people get hurt, people get injured, like the young man in Chicago a few weeks back when the police came to his house. They wound up tearing his meniscus, and now he's no longer able to participate in athletics, which is something that he was very much interested in, and bound, college bound, professional athlete bound, if you will. So, you know, while this young man didn't die, I mean, you know, his life is forever changed. Same with Treshawn. He was not killed, thankfully. I believe he suffered some injuries. Don't know the extent of the injuries, but all of this maybe could have been avoided if he just would have gone along with whatever the officers were asking him to do. And remember, there's a process, you guys. If you're not happy with the way a police officer is treating you or talking to you, there's a process that every police department has that you should follow. And again, what I'm sharing with you is not necessarily saying that it's going to make a difference for you or even make a difference for the next person, but it's important to create the paper trail. It's important to show a pattern of practice. Maybe these officers had done that before they attacked Treshawn, but there's just no record of it because the person that they attacked previously thought nothing would happen and there was no reason to report it or whatever. So it's very important to comply and complain. And there is nothing shameful. There is no harm in wanting to live through a police encounter. And I think, young people, if you get that through your mind, you know, I get that they're disrespecting you and they're talking to you in a way that's inappropriate. I get all of that. But there is no harm in wanting to live through that encounter. So that's my first story dealing with the young man, Treshawn Broughton. The second story has to deal with, this is kind of interesting to me because there's a Black female lieutenant in Cincinnati. She's a Black female lieutenant. Her name is Danita Pettis. And Danita Pettis is having a real situation right now with two white female officers who are suing her for discrimination and harassment, and she in turn is suing them for discrimination and harassment, and a whole host of other things. And what's interesting to me about this story with Lieutenant Pettis over there in Cincinnati is that there's a Black police chief over there. His name is Elliot Isaac. He's a police chief, and he was appointed back in December of 2015. He's a 29-year veteran on that department. He's been very quiet in all of this, and I'm wondering why. Because if there's consternation and there's angst between this lieutenant and subordinates, police officers, this police chief could put an end to that stuff yesterday. This police chief hasn't come out and said anything with regards to this back and forth that's going on, but there must be some validity. There must be some validity to the fact that these white officers have been disrespectful, if you will, to the female lieutenant, because the lieutenant was successful in transferring one of the females out of the department. One of the females was successfully transferred to another unit, if you will, within that police department because she was being disrespectful, because she was using racist remarks. So clearly the chief, Elliot Isaac, is supporting this lieutenant to that extent, because none of this stuff could happen on his watch without his knowledge, without his input. Folks don't just get transferred around and it's made the news. There's a couple of different articles that have been written with regards to these dueling lawsuits. Now, one of the female white officers is accusing this Lieutenant Pettis of not being qualified to be a lieutenant, right? They said that, you know, they only promoted her to lieutenant because she was Black. Now, Pettis's clapback was, Heifer, I came out number 2 on the lieutenant's list, so I don't know what you're talking about. And the female officer accused the lieutenant of stealing, of committing some kind of a crime that she should have been charged with. And so what seems suspect to me about all of that is that if that were true, if this female lieutenant had actually committed some kind of a theft, some kind of a crime, surely that would be an easy way for this police department to deal with her and charge her. I mean, if you're committing crimes, you don't have the luxury of deciding whether or not you want to prosecute. And so I'm sure the police department would have gone after this lieutenant vigorously based on the articles that are written and based on the angst that seems to be going on between these two ladies. And listen, you know, most police departments, like any other large agency, nobody likes dirty laundry being aired. And these two ladies are definitely doing that. So again, I'm just wondering why the police chief isn't taking a more active role in all of the shenanigans that are going on between these ladies. It seems like, you know, it's almost like a cat fight or something, right? And don't know what the real deal is with regards to that. But anyway, so I'm going to keep an eye on this fist fight over there in Cincinnati between Lieutenant Danita Pettis and these two females. One of the other things that is going on over there on that police department, because there seems to be a lot of backbiting, and some of this is involving not only, well, the mayor's gotten involved because now the city manager has been forced to resign as a result of this back and forth. And some of this has to do peripherally, if there's such a word, I just made up a word. Some of this has to do with that whole situation involving the shooting of Sam DuBose. Remember Sam DuBose? He was the young man, he was the gentleman who was shot and killed in his car by a university police officer by the name of Ray Tenzing. Cincinnati police officers, from the homicide unit, I believe, were responsible for the investigation of that officer involved shooting. And there was some consternation or there was a belief from the FOP, which we're going to talk about FOP in a minute, but from the FOP there in Cincinnati, that they had issue with the way a sergeant detective on Cincinnati was treated during the trial for Ray Tenzing, during the trial with regards to the shooting of Sam DuBose. Now that was a hung jury. The jury couldn't decide whether or not to charge Ray Tenzing. He was ultimately fired, not from Cincinnati, but from the University Police Department. Ray Tenzing was ultimately fired, but Cincinnati PD was involved in the investigation and the handling of that homicide. And because FOP has not seen a police shooting that they can't get excited about, didn't like the way one of their sergeants over there at Cincinnati was treated. And somehow this bleeds over into the whole city manager, into the whole black-white consternation. Can't think of a better word. The whole problems that are going on between black officers and white officers. Lieutenant Pettis says that, the FOP does not support black officers. And so, nobody's surprised by that, because that's why so many police departments have had to create their own, blacks had to create their own associations, not a union, but just an association that hopefully would speak to the things that concern black police officers. And so one of the other problems is that allegedly the FOP does not support, in terms of an investigation, if a black officer is accused of wrongdoing, the FOP doesn't step in and help out to the same extent that they help out with a white officer who's accused. Black officers in Cincinnati have to go out and get private counsel. And so you understand how expensive that is if you have to go and get your own attorney to represent you and defend you, whereas white officers don't have to worry about that same kind of expense because the FOP does. Now, I don't know how that works. I don't know if they pay dues or something to the FOP, and if black officers can compel them to provide representation, or if the black officers just choose to not pay into that system, thereby they're not paying into the system, and so the system doesn't support them when they're accused of wrongdoing or misconduct. But all of this black-white stuff is going on, and so you understand that if that kind of turmoil exists inside the police department between black and white, you understand why it goes on to the extent that it does outside the police department. So I'm going to keep an eye on Lieutenant Danita Pettis, and I'll report back to you, what ultimately happens, how this situation is resolved. And it may take a little while because it sounds like they're going to go to court, and nobody's racing to court, right? There's going to be some kind of litigation. It's civil litigation. It may not be resolved for many months or years. And I know a little bit about civil litigation and how long that stuff can take, and what happens when you have powerful people coming after you. Now, this is the reverse for Lieutenant Pettis, because she has subordinates who are coming after her. My experience in terms of retaliation and discrimination on the job had to do with higher ups coming after me. And I talk about that. I mentioned it before in my book that's going to be coming out, Black and Blue, The Creation of a Whistleblower. And so for anyone who wants to know what that looks like, what Lieutenant Pettis is up against, what I was up against, because it doesn't matter whether it's the police department, whether you work for a hospital, or if you work for a school district like the Los Angeles Unified School District. It's a tough road to hoe when you are just one person going up against a bureaucracy. And so I talk about it in my book. You could go to my website, www.sergeantsgt.com. You'll see all of the books that I've written. I've written 3. You can read the first chapter of Black and Blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate. You can also read the first chapter of Black and Blue, The Creation of a Whistleblower. And you'll see just how intense that whole situation has been in terms of trying to fight a bureaucracy when you feel like you've been discriminated against and you don't have the support or the backing of the higher ups. Now, I said I was going to talk a little bit about the FOP versus the Black Police Officers Association and what I think about how the two act or don't act. And FOP, their job is to protect officers. And I don't want to just say white officers, but that's what winds up happening. Black police officer associations ideally, generally, are set up to address the issues that are important to Black police officers. And why? I don't know if it's an East Coast, West Coast thing, because I know that there are some Black police officer associations on the East Coast that look very different and act very differently from what I'm familiar with here on the Los Angeles Police Department. We've had some instances where there have been some Black-white issues, and our Black Police Officers Association, which is called Oscar Joe Bryant, OJB, was silent, painfully silent. We had a white officer by the name of Frank Liga who was involved in he was on duty when he shot and killed an off-duty LAPD officer, both from LAPD. The off-duty officer was Black. Frank Liga was on duty. He's white. And this thing, you can Google it and research it, and you can see what went on with that. And you can also check some of my prior YouTube videos where I talk about that whole Frank Liga thing. But, you know, I know a lot of people, colleagues and peers that were wanting the Oscar Joe Bryant Association to step in and weigh in with regards to the whole Frank Liga, Kevin Gaines deadly shooting, and they were silent. And I can only surmise that a lot of it has to do with the same reason Black officers who are in positions of authority or who aspire to be in positions of authority don't speak out, don't speak against the system, because they don't want to upset the apple cart, if you will. And so most of those officers who are, at least on LAPD, and that's all I really can speak to for sure, are, you know, police officers who may want to be a sergeant or lieutenant or commander or police chief. And so they're not going to do anything that's going to buck the system and ruin that possibility. And so our OJB was silent on that. And they've been silent on a lot of stuff. The only time for me I ever really noticed even the NBPA, the National Black Police Officers Association, coming out forcefully and taking a stand was during the Colin Kaepernick situation, where they actually wrote a letter. The NBPA actually wrote a letter with regards to Black police officers standing up and supporting Colin Kaepernick and why he kneels and all of that. And of course, we know that he kneels not because of some opposition to the flag or a lack of patriotism, but because of what goes on with community and police in our communities. So that was the first time that I had actually ever seen a Black Police Officers Association speak out so forcefully. If you know you're not going to have the support of your chief, if you know you're not going to have the support of your immediate supervisors, police officers are no different than anybody else when it comes to not wanting to be retaliated against. And folks can say what they want. You know, you should speak out. And if you don't speak out, then you're just as guilty as the person who did a thing. If you are guilty by commission, or you could be guilty by omission, right? And so there's a price to pay. There's a consequence if you speak out. And a lot of people are just not ready to deal with or sacrifice promotions or coveted positions that they may aspire to. And so I think that's true of the OJB. I can't speak to other associations, but I would say that that's true of OJB. And that's true of the Blacks who've been lucky enough to promote. And I shouldn't say lucky, but for those Blacks that did promote on the LAPD, you know, you don't get to breathe that special air unless you are kind of willing to go along to get along. So my personal experience has been that I've never met or worked for anybody above the rank of captain who looks like me that had a spine. That animal just does not exist. So anyway, on to Chicago. I read an article recently that, you know, I've been wondering why what do you guys call him? Superintendent Eddie Johnson in Chicago hadn't reached out to someone to ask for assistance and input in helping solve the problems that are going on over there in Chicago. And so recently it was reported on WGN 9 News that Bratton from NYPD, remember he was over at LAPD as our police chief for a minute. And so now Bratton and Superintendent Eddie Johnson are having a bromance. And yeah, these two guys, you know, reminded me of a scene from Pulp Fiction, and I don't want to be too gross or too profane or whatever, but you know, if you guys have seen Pulp Fiction as many times as I have, and you know that scene when Harvey Keitel comes and he solves the problem that they were having, and John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson were all excited about it. And he said, well, hold up, let's not start being real nice to one another. I'm gonna just say it like that. Let's not start being real nice to one another just yet. And so I think Eddie Johnson and Bratton probably shouldn't do that bromance thing in public just yet. So Bratton is coming over, and he's coming over to help. What he says is implement some strategies and offer some insights to fight violent crime. Well, that's all great and good, but what Bratton doesn't mention, and Eddie Johnson didn't ask him about, what are we going to do about these police killings, if you will, in Chicago, the Roy Olivers, right? What about these officers who create and manufacture probable cause or reasonable suspicion to engage a Black person in that community, and then create a situation where they escalate it to a use of deadly force? So I wonder, what is Bratton going to implement with regards to that? Because I didn't hear any mention of that. I don't get the idea that they have an appetite to do that. They say all the right things. They talk about addressing the mistrust between the police and minority communities. How do you address the mistrust between police and minority communities? Minority communities are their words, not mine. Black folks, without admitting that you have police officers that are out there that are ill-suited to do the job. You have police officers out there that don't have the right temperament. You have police officers out there that are willing to lie. And those lies are facilitated by supervisors, by sergeants and other high-ranking officials, because a police officer in patrol has to report to a whole bunch of folks. So how are these things allowed to happen time and time again without supervisory managerial oversight? How is that able to happen without a supervisor paying attention to what the patrol officers are doing? And so I'm wondering, while they're implementing strategies and coming up with insights on what to do, Bratton and Mr. Johnson, what are you guys going to do about that? What Mr. Johnson said with regards to Bratton coming over and hanging out with them, he says, I can't think of any other person I'd rather be talking to about the issues in Chicago other than this man right here, this man being Bratton. And then, you know, Bratton had some very complimentary things to say back to him. Chicago is one of the leadership positions in the country in use of technology, and coupled with old-fashioned police work, Bratton thinks they'll be able to fix that problem or fix those problems. That's a word salad. It's a word salad. It sounds good, sounds sexy, but you guys in Chicago, you know what's up. You know what happens every weekend. We have a holiday weekend coming up right now. I wonder how many people are going to be killed in Chicago over this Thanksgiving weekend. Anyway, so they're going to figure out some insights and figure out what to do. And one of the things that they're going to do is they're going to talk about civilian oversight. There's, I've said this before, civilian oversight is great if the civilian oversight comes with teeth. If they have a civilian review board that actually can do something more than make a recommendation, civilian review boards are great. So folks, as you attend community meetings, and I know that there was something not too long ago in Chicago, I'm wondering how many folks actually went to the meeting that they had to talk about this community input, the civilian review oversight, if you will. How many people took the time to go and actually have their voices heard? Because if you're not going to these meetings, if you're just coming in and commenting on my page or other pages, or or my YouTube videos. You're sick of this, and everybody gets sick for a moment, and then we move on to the next shiny object that makes us sick, because the media, police departments, they all understand that we have a short attention span, and that this too shall pass. And so that's one of the reasons why I keep revisiting things that have happened in the news, you know, a year or two ago, to just remind folks that this stuff is not a done deal. And so there were some debates that were had in Chicago, and there's going to be a decision made at the end of this year with regards to this consent decree, civilian oversight, greater accountability, blah, blah, blah. And understand, if you guys aren't paying attention and if you aren't making your voices known, understand that the FOP are fighting these things mightily. And so they've got the resources, and they've got the manpower, if you will, they being the FOP, and they are diligent. They are unrelenting in their pursuit of, we don't want oversight. We know what to do. Let us police us. So if you're not getting involved, if you're not getting engaged, then you really don't get to complain. Now, that's just part of what's going on in Chicago, the things that are affecting the community. There was a 54-year-old former commander by the name of Kenneth Johnson there in Chicago, and this guy was recently charged with stealing Social Security funds, and they said this scheme had been going on for about 23 years in Chicago. So, I mean, you guys got little problems and you guys got big problems. And I don't know, like everything else, there's not a one thing that's going to fix it. It's going to be multifaceted. Recruitment, I think, is a big, big deal. And so while I talk a lot of smack, if you will, about police departments and what goes on, change is going to come from the inside. And so I say to young people, if you really want to change your police department, you need to get on it, because these people that are on there who've been there for a long time, who are entrenched in this culture, they don't have any interest in doing anything differently. And so you need to get on that police department, and you need to start promoting and moving up through the ranks so that you put yourself in a position of authority. So when the time comes to implement a rule or create policy, you're there to do it with the mindset of, this is going to be in the best interest of my community. This is going to improve quality of life issues. So anyway, get involved, get engaged. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about the other thing that's going on in Chicago from last September 2017 involving Kenneka Jenkins. Someone had asked me kind of what I thought about it and to look into it. Now, listen, I'm no sleuth. I'm no investigator like that. But what I don't know what's going on with the Kenneka Jenkins story. I don't know that we'll ever know, because just because of the culture of that police department, I don't think this superintendent, I wonder if him and Bratton are talking about that. I don't know that he has any real interest or desire to do anything different with regards to the investigation of this young woman's death. I don't know enough about it to speak intelligently on, did she stumble into a freezer, or did someone else have something to do with her death? But what I did read most recently is that the family is no longer communicating or pursuing, allegedly, an investigation with regards to this young woman's death. And so it's very difficult if the family doesn't have concern, if the family is not pushing, and that's why it's so important to, where we can, to support the family and let them know that we still stand with them, even though it may be a year or two down the road. But if the family has stepped back, then you understand, then the police department, they don't have any interest in it if the family's not interested in it. And I don't know if that's why things haven't progressed. I know there's a lot of rumors, there's a lot of conspiracy theories, but at the end of the day, a substantive investigation is going to be driven by the family. And right now, the family seems to be kind of MIA. So, will that change? I don't know. Did the family stand down because it's a financial burden, because they don't have the funds to pay an attorney to pursue the investigation? I don't know. It's you know, I don't live in Chicago. I'm in California, so I'm only reporting to you back things that I've read, and it's very limited in terms of new and fresh stuff. But again, the fact that the mother um, petitioned to get some information from the hotel with regards to the death of her daughter, did get the information, and then didn't act on it is troubling for me. So that's it. I want to thank everyone for hanging out with me tonight. And I want to say, you know, I have so much to be thankful for, but I'm particularly thankful for all of you. I'm thankful that you guys have been so supportive of me in these last few weeks and months. And I'm believing that in 2019, Sergeant Dorsey Speaks is going to be doing amazing things. I've got lots going on the back burners. I got a lot of coals on the fire, and something is about to jump off. I can't really speak to it right now, but I've reported before that I've been in talks with some producers with regards to doing some things. I've been working on some documentaries. And so all of that, I believe I'm able to accomplish because of the interest that many of you are showing in what it is that I have to say in terms of speaking my truth. So I want to thank you all. I want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. And until next time, be good and be safe.